We're going to transition now into the post-game wrap-up. So, Dragons, before we get into some of the technologies that you saw today, maybe I'll ask each of you, when you're evaluating companies, what's the first thing that you look for? Christian, maybe this is a good one to start with you to get the investment perspective. So are you looking at the founder? Are you looking at the product? Or are you looking at the actual problem that they're trying to solve?
I know, frankly, it's all three of those. So, I mean, in the end, to have a great company, you need to have a great team. You need to have a big market that they attack, and you need to have a superior product. And I would say it's a combination of these three factors.
How about you, Lola?
I mean, coming from, the storytelling side and the startup side as well, I think for me, it's being able to clearly define the problem you're trying to solve and why the solution you're bringing is the best solution to solve it, and if you can't communicate that, then no matter how strong your team is, you have to get over that hurdle to get people along, to understand your story, to understand why you are the best person to solve this problem. If you can get over that hurdle, then looking at the team or everything else may not be as strong, but being able to show what the problem is and how you're solving it in a very strong way.
Yeah, and Jürgen, when you Jeroen, when you transitioned into the pandemic here, you proved that the quality of a team is really important to pivot and really look for new opportunities, because obviously the corporate travel space was quite impacted, and you realized you had to be opportunistic and find the next thing to solve relatively quickly.
Yes, it is, but it is also about resilience, right? It will never go as planned, and that also comes back to the team. If you think it will run as you plan, you will be dead on arrival. So therefore, that's also a trait to look into, and that also means a lot of creativity. And I also think that in presentations like these, it comes through if you have that creativity already, and also how you react to these crazy questions that we dragons have to ask as well.
Yeah, so that's a good transition. So today we saw meetings and event application. We saw a mobility company. We saw a couple of hospitality, pricing, and revenue management. I think data was probably a big theme, which I suppose makes sense. Revenue management, as the travel industry essentially zeroed out from a revenue perspective. These companies are really trying to help businesses recognize this, brand new data source that's out there in the market and really make sense of it and help kind of pull people through the funnel and optimize pricing. Is that kind of what you all expected to see? Was there something that jumped out as really missing? And what did you like? What was kind of your favorite out of the pitches today?
I can start. I mean, I think the one that jumped out the most for me was Indie Camper, because it's just a very solid business model. They know what they're doing, strong foundation, and they're able to pivot as well, opening up a marketplace this year. And then Room Genie, I think that one was also just great with the storytelling. So those two are the ones that really, for me, kind of stood out in terms of being able to adapt, see those opportunities, and then being able to communicate what they're trying to do.
Christian?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a great variety of products companies that we saw. I found it very interesting that actually 5 of the 6 were on the B2B side, and 2 were really deep tech. So if we had done this a couple of years ago, probably like most of the companies would have been B2C. Still, if you ask me what was my favorite, I mean, I'm a B2C guy by heart, so also Indie Camper was my favorite here.
The reason why I thought Indie Camper was cool, because they still own 95% of the shares, which I, as an entrepreneur, I bootstrapped 2 out of my 3 companies. That gets most of the respect. So no harm here, Christian. But I really like the diversity as well. Although revenue management, this was a class in revenue management, because I think 3 of those actually touch base on that, which is sort of, in my book, it's it's not the 0 to 1 company, but it's the 98 to 99% type of company. Super duper important, obviously, if you're an operator or a supplier in that case. And even though we were not on the B2C side, I did miss a lot of the experiential stuff, right? So what is happening in our consumer life that is changing? I think Indie Camper touched upon it, and the last example is, it is super duper cool, right? I can imagine us flying that new bike to work, or getting my new parcels delivered that way. That would be super cool. I'd sign up for that too.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, we have a couple of those experiential companies that kind of touch on societal shifts that will be pitching as part of the launch session. So, was there anything else that maybe, Christian, that you've seen out in the market, at least from a business model perspective, that's really interesting as we're kind of starting to see some signs of recovery? Certainly here in the US, we're seeing a lot of that pent up demand that's being unleashed into the market. I think revenge travel, Lola, is probably a word that you've heard quite a bit. Yes. Anything else, Christian, that you're seeing as you're looking for companies and opportunities that maybe the audience should know a little bit about?
I mean, first of all, frankly, throughout 2020, investing in travel companies has been a dirty word. And I mean, you showed the slide in the beginning, but I would expect that actually most of the funding that went in last year was internal rounds for companies that had to get funding from their existing shareholders, because else they wouldn't have gone out of business. And what we've seen is that this has totally changed over the last 3 to 6 months. So everyone is ready and willing to invest into travel startups again, which is great for our industry. One thing that I find very interesting that I think a lot about is what is really going to change because of COVID in our travel habits, and what are the companies that can capitalize on that. And to give you an example from what we saw before, a company like Troop, I think before COVID, I would have said it's just not interested because it's not solving a big problem. But now that companies are going to be more virtual and having less actual offices and be more distributed across the world, it is actually a much more interesting proposition than it was before COVID.
So Lola, just thinking about some of the experiences you've had in your career, obviously from your photography perspective, as well as from your kind of wearing your startup hat with your latest venture, which is Local Purse. What are some of the biggest pain points that you see in the market that need to be solved as we start to gradually come out of this pandemic?
Absolutely. And I think, what the pandemic showed us is that the travel industry is still, as innovative as we are, we're still one of the last industries to be really fully digital. I mean, we need to be there in person to meet, to actually operate. And so the pandemic was an opportunity to start moving some processes, some experiences into a more digital space, but then also looking at other industries, what other macro trends are going on in other industries, like the retail space, like the future of work, and how can we bring some of that into travel? That's what I think Troop is doing in terms of the future of work and some other startups. So that's what we need to do so we can build back better, and travel in a better way. So we need to kind of see how we can bring some of those trends in and make our industry more sustainable.
Great. And Jeroen, you've obviously built a startup roadmap. You sold it during the pandemic, which was an interesting time to exit. What sort of advice do you have for travel startups? Maybe since you've been through all phases of that journey, although I suppose you're just embarking on the now I have a boss phase. So can you kind of provide some advice to startups out there?
Well, enjoy the ride, right? So that's the single most important item, because it will get bumpy, and therefore you need to make sure that you anticipate any change that you see coming. And the other piece is go to the Phocuswright conference. Now, this is not an advertorial. Pete did not pay me, but the beer at the bar at Phocuswright is always cheap compared to the outcome of the relationships that you will build at these conferences. And as much as we like this virtual stuff, we need to do this in person. And especially once you're starting a company, make as many of those connections you can, and do it right here, right now.
Great. Thanks. I think that's a good note to end it on. So appreciate it. Thanks a ton, Dragons. So